So what was the reaction of the Converse staff, the Foot Locker staff, to these ideas that we could be using reclaimed materials, or of course you were showing them materials that hadn't been processed? How did they respond to this at this event?
They were quite surprised, I think, and a bit of surprise, shock and awe in a way. And
we need to start making more conscious material choices.
I set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
We're joined by a materials designer and textiles designer who believes we should be taking more attention to the materials that surround us. It's the founder and director of Maire. Everyone, please welcome Seetal Solanki. Seetal, for over a decade you've worked in materials design and textiles design. I've read through your website, I've read some articles with you. You think we should be paying more attention to the materials that surround us. You really believe in the idea of educating people about materials. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you think that's important?
well, when you think about it, everything is made of something. And that has an impact across every single industry, every single sector, and every single one, and therefore has an impact on the planet. So if we start to rethink and re-educate and somehow understand what surrounds us and what we use on an everyday basis has an impact beyond ourselves. So if we understand what something is made of, we understand the material. So the material allows us to figure out where its raw material comes from, how it then is being processed, how it then degrades. So the life cycle of the material, it needs to be understood for it to then be used responsibly. So what we're really doing is we have part of the school, which is very much about educating people around materials. So that can be public facing. We'll do a lot of work with schools as well. We do a lot of work with clients ranging from corporations like Nike and Google to individuals. And then that's very much around workshops, talks, demos, and that kind of thing. And then that allows us to really build a bit more of a strategic approach to how they can actually apply them. So that can be in the form of consultancy, so we'll do that, more advisory. And then we also have a design studio, which is very much what we do as a practice, is changing the narrative around materials, because at the moment we only understand them as metal, wood, and plastic and glass, and this is very limited. And this limitation doesn't allow us to really fully appreciate materials' characteristics. So a material can also be soft, like wood, for example. There's lots of fabrics and fibers that are made from cellulose, which is made from wood fiber. So that allows the wood to be soft. There's obviously paper, and then there's obviously solid versions of wood. So the variations of a single source, it allows it to have many different textures and qualities and applications.
And I mean, you talked about a broad range of people there that are involved in the work that you're in. Is understanding more about materials something you think that the broader public should get to grips with? And what would be the benefits if so?
Most definitely. I think in the past, I would say materials has very much been in the sciences and in academia, I would say. And my role in Maire is very much about bringing it to a wider audience. So it's not just the people who know about this subject and get to appreciate it or be involved in it. It's about addressing it to the wider audience and the wider public, because they're the majority, I would say. And therefore that has a much wider impact.
And so to that end, you have published this book, Why Materials Matter. This was last year, this was published.
Yeah.
You tell us a little bit about what we might find inside this book.
Yeah, of course, and it definitely relates back to this idea of making materials more accessible. So this book is very much about bridging the gap between academia and sciences and making it more wider appeal. So in this book, you'll find not just your woods, metals, and plastics, you'll also find materials that are made from bacteria or digital materials or materials that are made from air and water. Or water as a material. So I think it's widening the vocabulary around materials and getting people to really not just navigate, but also understand the world around them and actually what designers, artists, scientists, chefs even I've included in the book really are engaging with this practice, and it's not just design. It's also addressing the food system, it's also addressing architecture, so lots of different scales. So we've got students featured in the book to corporations that are actually doing it on scale. So various scales as well as various industries.
Let me ask you this question. When you speak to people maybe for the first time about you work in materials, what's the materials facts, the really quirky things you might have up your sleeve that you can tell people about, something that surprises them?
So even the most granular level, even the micro level, can be a material. So something like a bacteria is something that's driving material change that can actually be biodegradable. So something invisible is actually being made visible. I think that is kind of a bit mind-blowing to me.
Okay, now let's go into an example then we picked out from the book earlier. It's about, you mentioned water before and how water can be used. And you were telling me this off camera earlier. I was really struck by this example. Tell us about the coconut water.
Yeah, so it's a studio called Maire. They're based in South India in a coconut farm, actually. So they are really driving change within the wastewater that's being produced with coconut water. So it's the water that isn't drinkable. So what they're doing is they found a naturally occurring bacteria within the coconut water, which is, and it enables it to grow in a humid environment. If left within like up to 2 weeks, it can grow a film-like texture, which sort of grabs itself onto sisal fibers, which is a natural fiber, and it creates a substrate. And that substrate feels like a leather, basically. So it's an entirely bespoke, grown leather-like material which isn't killing animals, and it's completely biodegradable. And it's really durable at the same time. So they are now putting it into footwear, furniture, and what's quite amazing with it is fabrics and leather obviously have lots of waste because the way that it's being cut, you get offcuts. So those offcuts are rarely used. And with this technique of growing your own material, it means you can grow a specific mold for the shape you require. So I think that's kind of ingenious. So there's no waste, effectively, in the material process.
And I think we've got a couple of images of this coconut leather in use. Could you tell us, like, how does it compare in terms of functionality with cow's hide leather? Like, where's the differences between the two?
I would say the difference is maybe the visual difference, I would say, is it's probably less buttery, like with some leathers. I think it's still got the durability as a leather. It hasn't obviously been tested, or does it last 200 years? That's yet to be defined, but I think it's got similar qualities as a leather. It's definitely got that grain that you would find with a leather, and the toughness as well.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, and in terms of the entire system as well, it's more beneficial. Did you say it was biodegradable too?
Completely biodegradable.
That's remarkable. And of course, there's no animals being reared in order to make the leather too, so...
Exactly.
Yeah, there's many advantages there.
Yeah, and it's also using a byproduct from a factory that would normally put it to waste, and that coconut water has so much bacteria within it, so it does end up harming water streams as well. So they're kind of saving it from having that impact as well.
The theme of the diff this year is, or rather this September, is This Is How We Did It, and we're looking to find out what the stories are behind how someone's managed to achieve something. You've achieved the writing of this book, and I'd just like to know, where's the original idea come from for you to put something like this together?
It really stems on my own frustrations. I would say when being asked, what do I do for a living? And I would say I'm a textile designer or a materials designer sometimes, depending on my mood. The usual response would be, oh, can you make me a dress? And yes, I can, but I can also potentially make a textile that could power your home. So the limited knowledge of what textiles and materials can achieve and material designers can achieve, I think needs to be represented somehow. So not just this book, but Matter really is about making a stand, making it more wider known to what materials and material designers can do. Yeah, it just catapulted me into a way that I had to get it out there. And it was great timing as well, because now the conversation is achieving quite a lot, I think, in terms of its global reach with the book. It's something physical and tangible for people to understand. I've used a language that is very accessible, but yet with the scientific backing with it. So it's, now it's in second print, which is quite amazing considering it's not even been a year yet.
Now, I work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so perhaps I live in a bubble around ideas related to materials and different uses of them. But I do get the sense, and everyone links it to the David Attenborough documentary, that in the public's eye there's been a lot more conversation about materials recently, and plastics in particular. You're wearing a pair of shoes right now that speak to all of that. Can you tell us about the Converse shoes you've got on?
Yeah, of course. So what's been great recently is Converse have launched a new campaign called Renew, and we've had the privilege of working with them on launching the product. And so the laces and the eyelets are made from recycled plastic, and then the sole of the shoe is made from recycled rubber. So they're making leaps and strides in making their product from more responsible choices and sources. And so we've been able to not only educate the staff around their material choices and understand the processes behind making these materials and the outputs that they have, it's also educating the people that are selling it. So we've been working with Foot Locker and Office and seen displays of the people that actually got us involved, and they designed the space, which we were really overseeing of what material choices they were making, where they were sourcing them from. So a lot of the materials were borrowed, reclaimed sources, and actually rented. So it was a 3-day event that happened in King's Cross. So not only are the shoes telling a story, but the whole event was telling a story. And not many of the materials were processed either. So they had very little impact in terms of the way that they were cut or sliced. We left a lot of the materials quite whole, and therefore they had a second life because they could be returned to the supplier, which is amazing. And then the stools that people were sitting on, they were all modular. So they were all slotted together, so they didn't have any fixtures or fittings applied to it either. So the entire launch and the product is quite circular, I would say.
Top diff fact for you: the sofa you're sitting on and the chair I'm sitting on also modular. We're going to speak to the designer of these this furniture a little bit later in the diff.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Yeah. So what was the reaction of the Converse staff, the Foot Locker staff, to these ideas that we could be using reclaimed materials, or of course you were showing them materials that hadn't been processed? How did they respond to this at this event?
They were quite surprised, I think, and a bit of surprise, shock and awe in a way. And what was really great in terms of their reaction was these shoes don't look any different to the usual iconic Chuck Taylor, and I think that's what's so amazing. It's quite deceptive in a way, and then once they understand, oh, these are made from recycled plastic, they're like, no way. Like, so this sort of surprise and delight, I think, enables curiosity, and that curiosity then gets them to ask loads of questions, and those questions get them to rethink the way that they are living and consuming. And that's the reaction that I got across the board, I think.